What are the reasons for the rising hunger numbers on the continent? According to the United Nations Food and Agricultural Organization, after a decade of the world making progress in fighting food insecurity, world hunger has increased by more than 20% for people in Africa, and more than one-third are undernourished, the highest proportions since 2014, and greater than any other region worldwide. The United Nations Food and Agriculture Organization estimates that around 800 million people on the continent, equivalent to about 60% of the continental population, are affected by moderate or severe food insecurity. Some point to the COVID pandemic's impact on the local supply chains and food shortages. But many analysts say it's drought due to growing climate change issues. That is the main reason for the growing hunger on the continent. We'll discuss this and more on this week's edition of Our Voices. Hello, I am Semenya Shekoye and this is Our Voices. On today's program, we'll take a look at how violent conflicts, climate change, and the pandemic are escalating food shortages on the African continent, and why many believe a famine is looming for tens of thousands. Let's begin in Madagascar, where more than 1 million people are suffering from a 4-year drought that the World Food Programme is calling the worst in 40 years. Many people in Madagascar are at risk of the world's first climate-produced famine. Nkosinathi has the story.
Water is precious and rare in southern Madagascar, where rain has not fallen in some areas for years. Farmer and father of 6, Dipens Untobo lost all his crops and animals to the drought, the worst to hit the region in 4 decades.
There was no more water to drink. The price of rice had gone up. We had to sell our livestock to buy food. I was very afraid to die. If it wasn't for the government's help, we would have died of hunger.
Thousands of people have fled Madagascar drought-ravaged areas to look for food. As the World Food Programme warns, the risk of famine is growing. To cope, authorities built centers for healthcare and to teach mothers how to process cassava to feed their children.
Mais aussi tout ce qui est distribution des repas chauds.
Also, distribution of hot meals, food, and water every day. There are approximately 40,000 people, even 100,000 people per day, to whom we have been able to distribute 1 liter of water per person per day in these centers.
Par personne par jour dans ces centres.
Green Title, a government project launched this year, gives farmers like Untobo land, seeds, and livestock to help them recover. The program also teaches Madagascar's farmers sustainable agriculture so they can be more resilient to future droughts. It's an important skill for farmers on the island nation which sees frequent drought.
Vu la disponibilité ou non de l'eau,
given the availability or not of water, given the characteristics of the land, how should you grow what to make things better? That's the bottom line. That's climate-smart agriculture.
Intelligente face au climat.
The Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change says temperatures in southern Africa are rising at double the global rate. For farmers like Untobo, the war against drought and famine is far from over. Nkosinathi for VOA News, Antananarivo, Madagascar.
Let's move to another hotspot, Ethiopia's Tigray region, where millions of people are in desperate need for food aid. And even in Mekelle, the regional capital, displaced families say that on some days they have nothing to eat. As VOA's Heather Murdoch reports from Mekelle, hunger is only one element of the growing crisis stemming from the conflict in the region.
This school campus is now one of more than 24 camps for displaced families in Mekelle, the capital of Ethiopia's Tigray region. More than 80 people sleep inside each of these classrooms, the families say, and every one has a harrowing story about how they got here.
I was at the market on a Saturday when suddenly tanks pulled in and the war began. I ran to my house and my sister was making coffee. I told her we had to run. We saw houses burning and heard bombs.
The World Food Programme says 5.2 million people in Tigray, more than 90% of the region's population, need emergency food aid. But here in Mekelle, where aid is available, people go hungry. By mid-afternoon in this camp, many families say they haven't eaten anything yet, and that this is not unusual. Local leaders of the displaced families say residents here are short of almost everything.
We are facing a lot of difficulties. We don't have enough food, shelter, sleeping materials, and clothing. Before the war, we fed our children 3 times a day, but now we cannot.
The conflict in the Tigray region began in November last year, when Ethiopian government troops were sent to the region to crush the forces of the Tigray People's Liberation Front. Now, roughly 2 million people have been forced from their homes. Thousands have been killed. Many more, like Zufan's 11-month-old son, have been injured. Zufan says her son's arm was injured as she fled, and it took her months to reach Mekelle for treatment.
I went to the doctor yesterday. He said, "Where were you? He needed an operation, but now you are too late."
There are children at the camp without their parents, and parents who lost their children in the chaos, Zufan says. And while her son may never have full use of his arm again, there are so many other mothers whose children are dead. Heather Murdoch, VOA News in Mekelle.
To discuss why hunger is growing rapidly in the African continent and the impact it's having on communities, I talked to Hajir Malim, the Regional Director of East and Horn of Africa at Action for Hunger, an organization that has been on the front lines preventing and treating hunger.
There is no short of efforts to try and address the increasing levels of vulnerabilities in Africa. However, these efforts are not meeting the intended targets because of a number of factors. One is the increasing levels of conflict that is driving tens of millions of communities from their homes and making them vulnerable. When a community is uprooted by conflict, they then lose the ability to be able to produce their own food, and therefore this then subject them to hunger. In addition to conflict, we're seeing dramatic impact of climate change across the African continent. In Africa, traditionally, farmers and pastoralists have ways of managing the shocks that they face. However, with now frequent droughts, this coping mechanism and traditional ways of rangeland management is being compromised as the severity of these droughts and floods continue to erode the existing capacities within these communities. And finally, as COVID-19 has hit the world, we're seeing that impact as well on the food security situation in Africa.
You mentioned conflict as one of the major driving forces to the rise of hunger. And we are seeing new conflicts emerging in the Horn of Africa and at the continent level in Africa. And the old conflicts are even getting protracted, and none of them are going away. What are the solutions to address the root causes of conflict, and how can Africa come out of this?
Definitely, conflict is increasing, and it's particularly impacting women and children who continue to remain vulnerable. Many of our refugee camps have 80% population who are women and children who continues to remain vulnerable to the impact of conflict. Then one key issue that's really driving this increase in conflict is lack of resources and the competition over the limited resources that exist within communities. Until we are able to find equitable ways of sharing resources and continue to support these communities to be able to find better ways of managing their resources and provide support to the best level we can. And there are very simple, easy solutions that has been devised by many of the humanitarian actors, like Action Against Hunger and many others on the ground that continue to support both peace building and development programming in these communities.
Your organization is working in all these countries. So how are you addressing, what are the help you are providing in these areas to address the hunger issue in the region?
Let me give you an example of one farmer we assisted in northern Somalia, in very dry areas, which is currently also facing drought condition. By providing training on good agricultural practices, by giving this particular farmer seeds and tools, and accompanying this farmer to help plant the crops and manage this in a very dry condition, today this particular farmer is able to have a profit of over $1,000 in less than 5 months. $1,000 in Somalia is a significant amount of money that is able to meet the food needs for a household of 6 over a period of 6 months.
Addressing hunger issue is more than just delivering food aid, I assume, and it requires supplying medical treatments, nutritional supplements, therapeutic programs. And how is that going at the time of COVID-19 when the world is lacking resources to help?
Definitely, COVID-19 had massive impact on household food security. We have seen livestock, which is a key lifeline in many of these communities, have their prices significantly shrunk. And this has exposed many of these communities because inter-country trade, regional trade has been hampered by the restrictions that have been put in place to contain COVID-19. In addition to that, access to healthcare is poor in many of these areas. And women who are the backbone of food production in many of these areas are also impacted as children get malnourished. Mothers continue to suffer from the impact of lack of access to health care. So what we're doing today is to make sure that we reinforce and support government's efforts to reach the last mile, deliver essential services, medical services, education services in terms of providing nutritional counseling and support to mothers at all levels, reaching the most vulnerable, the communities that are not reached by other actors on the ground.
It's time for a break. But first, do you think climate change is now the leading cause for food insecurity on the continent? And do you think the agreements made at COP26 end the scourge of hunger in Africa? Share your thoughts on our social media platforms. We are on Facebook, Instagram, and on Twitter. Our handle is at VOA Our Voices. We are also on WhatsApp, and our number is on the screen. When we return, we will examine how the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic continues to intensify hunger and food shortage across Africa. We'll be right back.
This is a country that I chose to become a citizen. I didn't have to become a citizen. I chose to become a citizen.
I feel like America gave me an opportunity to pursue my passion as an artist.
I really believe that clean eating is a way to a more successful life or a happier life, if you want to put it that way.
One of the things that helps me wake up every morning is doing better, being better.
We grew up poor, and so I'm always focused on helping the working class be able to have a more comfortable lifestyle.
I'm passionate about doing justice every day. I oftentimes say that justice is a verb, not a noun. You know, I believe in action and moving the ball forward.
Welcome back. You are watching Our Voices. In the grip of the COVID-19 pandemic, South Africa has seen hunger increase nearly threefold, according to the national survey. One Man is helping to tackle the problem by launching community farms to help feed inner city residents. Linda Giftash reports from Johannesburg.
Between flower beds, along roadsides, and on school fields, crops are springing up around South Africa's largest city. The idea of these so-called edible streets was spearheaded by Simbonga Nkandla and the nonprofit Makers Valley Partnership to curb hunger and malnutrition. The need became ever more apparent as gardens were picked bare when lockdowns hit last year.
You could see that this household haven't had a meal in the past 2 days or so. then definitely then others will open up their refrigerator for you, or others will open up their cupboard. You could see that there's literally nothing.
South Africa is a major producer and exporter of fresh food, but many in the country aren't able to fill their plates. A national survey led by South Africa's Research Council found that as many as 22% of the country's 60 million people experienced hunger since the pandemic struck. That's compared to just 6% pre-pandemic.
It's about inequalities and ineffective access to food in the different regions of the country. People not only lost their jobs, they didn't have access to food.
About 100 people benefit monthly from the food being produced on this urban farm. An open kitchen is also available to anyone in the community. This urban farmer says growing vegetables at home and in communities is one solution to secure nutritious food.
We've seen a lot of people coming here, wanting to harvest. Some, they don't have money. So we've seen a lot of people coming through and with the willingness of also working in the land because they see the results that they're gonna eat at the end of the day.
They're also teaching children how to grow vegetables and herbs, skills they can take home. With food prices having spiked nearly 7% this year, according to the government, these projects have become crucial to many.
If more people can be involved, in growing food, taking care of vacant land and try to make it in a food forest, then we can have more food, more people that we can feed.
Waiting for seeds to sprout is no quick fix. But with more funding, Makers Valley wants to plant more vegetable patches throughout the community to help put more greens on people's plates. Linda Giftash for VOA News, Johannesburg.
The coronavirus pandemic is increasing hunger and food insecurity in Zimbabwe, which was already struggling with a poor economy before the pandemic began, according to the government report released earlier this year. The World Food Programme says the problem is especially acute for unemployed urban dwellers. Columbus Mavunga reports from Harare.
The government report called Zimbabwe Vulnerability Assessment says about 2.4 million locals in the country's urban areas are struggling to meet their basic food needs because of lockdowns to contain the spread of COVID-19. Murambiwa Simon Mushongorokwa used to get casual factory jobs before the pandemic hit Zimbabwe.
I used to get about $30 a week. It was not enough for my needs. But when the lockdown came, it got worse until I started growing mushroom.
He uses forage from his backyard, corn and sorghum field to grow the mushrooms. He says he now gets about $5 a week from selling it and uses some for consumption with his wife and 5 dependents. Simon Julius Kufakwevanu, an official from a local NGO, has been teaching people in this poor suburb to grow mushrooms.
Before the introduction of mushroom growing farming in this area, it was very tough for people in this community to survive because of the lockdown and so forth. But now, when Fisher-Wolf brought in the mushroom growing, it's changing because you can now buy something. You are now able to go to the shops and buy mini meal, buy sugar and so forth.
The World Food Programme says it is looking for more ideas and resources to help 550,000 people like Mushongorokwa in urban areas get basic food for survival.
COVID-19 has not only wiped lives, it has wiped livelihoods as well. The number of people who are unable to put food on their table in Zimbabwe's urban areas has increased from 30% during the same period in 2019 to 42% right now.
Zimbabwe government says it is giving about $12 a month to families affected by lockdowns. That's nowhere near the $500 an average family of 5 to 7 people needs to survive each month. People like Mushongorokwa hope that with the lockdowns recently eased, jobs and livelihoods will come back. In the meantime, the WFP is seeking $32 million to feed food insecure urbanites. Columbus Mavungam for VOA News, Harare.
It's time for another break. When we come back, we will look at how farmers and entrepreneurs are using innovative technology and techniques to feed the hungry and still grow their business. That's coming up next. Stay with us.
We're bringing women's voices to the conversation, and more than that, we're building a community of inclusion and empowerment.
Here in Kinshasa, campaigns to raise awareness against the spread of coronavirus are common, but getting that information to people who have no access to water, electricity, or money can be a challenge.
We are here at Kalerwe Market, Uganda, Kampala, where in this whole market, women are crying out for their situations to change.
For women, it will be better for us.
I think a big thing for me is just being able to say that when these protests are happening, does it turn around into policy?
Our kids are raped every single day.
This movement got the government to listen. It really was powerful because it showed what is possible when men and women band together and say, enough is enough.
It's not necessary anymore to climb on a car. I can be in any place to cheer with the people.
Welcome back, and you are watching Our Voices. Now to Gabon, where more than 50 young people are in agriculture entrepreneurial training. The government's objective is to get them in the fields of market gardening, breeding, food crops, and farm management. They will benefit from financial and land support at the end of this 6 months diploma course. As a reminder, this project integrates all other initiatives taken by the Gabonese authorities to get the country out of food dependency. Here is Ismail Obangzi in Libreville.
As in a classroom, future agricultural entrepreneurs are in the School of Organic Soil Activity. This is an important part of the theoretical training before going into the field.
We are much more outside to learn how to make the boards, to make them, to prepare the ground, all operations necessary for agricultural activity.
On a more practical level, agripreneurs need to master the soil revitalization routes. Hoeing technology is an important part of the curriculum. It is a method to improve the nature of the soil and strengthen the plants. The first weeks of the project evaluation met the expectations of the Gabonese Development Support Institute.
When the learners arrived here, they are not very interested in it, but from the first lesson they understood the importance of acquiring a profession. And with this profession, they have the possibility to take charge. Talk about this agriculture project to see how they will put this training into practice.
Once the training completes, the students will be a part of the Gabonese Agricultural Achievements Program and the initiatives of the committed nationals to sell their products.
My dream is to have a farm. I realize that the agricultural sector, both in Africa and in our country, is a promising sector. And I wanted to participate alongside our government in ensuring that our country is self-sufficient in terms of food.
In search of food self-sufficiency, Gabon has secured and made 8,000 cadastral plots available for farmers' agricultural activities. We met Carl Moguba Mogula, a young agronomist technician in Libreville.
It's nice to see the products you produce yourself, your harvest. You can enjoy the food together with other people.
Gabon aims to locally produce 50% of the country's food demand by 2025, which will increase the share of agriculture in the country's GDP. This sector currently represents less than 10% of the GDP.
Some farmers and organizations in Africa are adopting technology-based solutions as the continent seeks to prepare itself for the effects of climate change. One group in Kenya is investing in cold storage facilities to ensure that excess agricultural produce that would have otherwise become gas-producing waste is collected, stored, and distributed to those in need, including victims of drought. Brenda Mulinya reports from Nairobi.
For close to 5 years, Food Bank in Kenya has been helping people like Lillian Vihenda feed their families. In the current hard economic times in Kenya, Lillian says these care packages from the non-profit group help keep her children in school.
The money that I would have used to buy food that I now get from the food bank, I use it to pay for my children's school fees, which is a great help.
The organization salvages abandoned excess food from farms and markets and stores it for distribution to the needy and vulnerable. The food bank's mission to eradicate hunger and tackle food waste has also morphed into a campaign to stop the harmful impact of climate change. John Gathungu, the non-profit's head, says the recent acquisition of a cold storage facility is enabling the food bank to store more and reduce greenhouse emissions from the farms.
When food in the farms ends up in the landfills, you find that there is a lot of toxicity within the air, because what happens is that when they rot in the landfill, they produce methane, which is a worse product than carbon dioxide. And if we curb food wastage, we can be able at least to reduce the amount of of gas that is produced from at least 6 to 80%.
Smart agriculture and technological advances will be key to helping Africa adapt and mitigate climate change impacts, says analyst Winnie Haimba.
Agricultural technologies that also ensure that you have reduced emissions, CO2 emissions, carbon dioxide emissions, methane emissions, and so on, which are all greenhouse gases, are really, really important. So I need of these technologies, and then also the capacity to be able to apply these technologies.
But technology requires funding, and that remains a challenge. Experts say the continent will need more than $300 billion over the next decade as it develops strategies that will help cushion it from the effects of climate change. Brenda Mulinya for VOA News, Nairobi.
You know any woman agriculture entrepreneurs or know of an organization who is working to combat hunger on the continent by providing an alternative in farming or provide food security? If you do, please let us know and share your comments using the hashtag VOA Our Voices. And that's where we will end our show this week. Thanks to my Our Voice colleagues, and on behalf of everyone at Voice of America, I am Semanyi Shekoye. Thanks for watching and stay safe.